and this is Ian Berry, and we're having a Spark a Nation conversation. For those of you who don't remember or don't know, a Spark a Nation is a spark that ignites passion that leads to action that changes what's normal. And today I'm joined by Terry, who's in Denmark, Peter's in the UK, Caroline is in Barcelona, and Kirsty is in Australia, as well as David being in Australia. So it's a nice flavour. And some brilliant people, I must say, as well. And I'm grateful for your presence in the room for what is the last of the We Need to Talk program. It has been my signature program now for a few years. And one of the reasons it evolved into the art of conversations has been that people wrote to me and saw and We Need to Talk as a negative and not as a positive, which is the way I see it. And hence there's been a bit of an evolution where my signature program is now the art of wise conversations, which Caroline and Kirsty are involved in, and I'll put a link to that if you haven't come across it. At the moment, there's a waiting list, but because not everyone can show up every time, if you go on the waiting list, you will get the invites. But one of the other things that's occurred during these episodes and what's occurred in my own work recently is I've become very dissatisfied with leadership. And I've been asking the question in some of my articles and some of my forums, is leadership, as we know it, still relevant? Or is it actually redundant? And is there a better way, or can we evolve leadership? And in my Wise Leaders community groups, I've been exploring how can we reimagine leadership so that politics and religion and business, which are probably the three main offenders, actually become relevant to what's going on in our world. Now, I say that with a caveat because I do know many great leaders, including the folk that you see on the screen. And so it's not all lost. There are some great positives. But I put out two articles that I wrote about this. And normally in these programs, I tell a story at the start. This time I've told my story, my opinions, my views in two articles. And I'm just going to refresh folks' memories by putting up some graphics from those two articles, one from each one. But I'll also put links so that you folks can read the full articles. So just let me get a hold of those articles. All right, so not letting me do what I want to do. So just try something else. Had a couple of technology gremlins today, but I seem to have got rid of that one that was stopping me from sharing the screen. Here we go with the first one. I'm still being stopped, so just bear with me while I work out what the problem is. Here we go. So this one was from the first article about leadership citizenship. And what I asked you to do, I hope you've had a chance to read these articles. This is the first one. And as always, what I say is important, but what you hear yourself say to yourself, that's what's more important. And so I'm interested in, when you read this article and looked at this diagram, what did you hear yourself say to yourself? Just going to stop the share there for a sec because there we go. I'm just having some gremlins. So what are your thoughts, folks?
So Ian, maybe if I kick off in terms of, as you know, I love quotes, and the quote over your shoulder, as I said, is something that really tickled my interest during the week, which came up on LinkedIn.
Yes.
But the quote that jumped to mind when I read this is something I've been thinking about over a number of months. It's attributed apparently to Napoleon Bonaparte, but it's the quote: "A leader is a dealer in hope."
A leader is
a dealer in hope. HOPE.
Yes, yes, I like that one myself.
And it's a simple statement, but it needs to be unpicked, because there's no successful leader who just gives baseless optimism.
No,
it's the people follow a leader because they actually truly believe that person will help them get to a better place. And it's this constant check of optimism, reality, believability, authenticity. And your diagram reminds me of that deliberation, because it's a constant loop, and it's not just a baseless amount of yes, it's all going to be better tomorrow. It all has to constantly loop from a vision, a goal, a belief that's believable, that people want to follow, that people want to put their energy behind, because the person's authentic, the person's believable, the person's deliverable, and it constantly moves like that. So when I read your piece and I looked at the diagram, that's what came to my mind.
I think that's a lovely insight. For those of you that can't read the quote over my right shoulder, it says, "Rules are not necessarily sacred, principles are." And I've used this quote in my work years back, and I saw it like you, Terry, I think on LinkedIn, which refreshed my memory of it. And it came to the fore this week. I've just taken on a new mentoring client, not someone I worked with before. They come from a referral from a person I've worked with lots over the years, and so there's already a basis of trust even before we begin our work. But she asked me, could I put in a sentence what I do? And my answer was that I'm a teacher of principles. I said to her, there's actually two sentences. One is, I'm a teacher of principles, proven principles that have been around mostly for thousands of years. And I tend to lend on BC principles more than since the Christian calendar, but I'm open to any kind of wisdom. So I'm a teacher of proven principles. But secondly, I work with people to help them to see possibility and then to turn possibility into reality. And it requires usually in that process a regeneration of their leadership, just as the planet is regenerating herself with or without our help. She's going to do it on her own if we don't get alongside and collaborate. Hence floods and fires and so on, because Mother Nature will take care of herself. We've just got to get on board and help and be engaged. So the regeneration is kind of outside the circle, pushing in, and the rest of these things, they do inspire hope, because they're about influence, inspiration, and insight. And also farsight, that ability to be an eagle and get above the clouds, as the song says, where the clear winds blow. And then to take a look at our impact. I think impact has replaced purpose as the most important thing that businesses can talk about. I think purpose is still important, but to me, impact has replaced it. I go with Robert Louis Stevenson, who once said that to be who we are and to become all that we're capable of becoming is the only purpose in life, full stop. I'm with that. And I think we've had so many watered down, miserable mission and purpose statements that it's now about impact. I'm not saying the purpose is not important, but I think it's about impact. And your company, Terry, I admire, because you guys are making an environmental impact that means a lot to millions of people.
Yeah, thank you.
What's the difference between purpose and impact in your view?
Well, I think purpose is a reason, impact's a result.
Okay.
Yeah, for me, Peter, that would be purpose is a vision, but the impact is what people actually feel. And that's what creates that. That's what creates that continuous loop of belief and fellowship.
And that links in with hope. Hope is not baseless optimism, as you said, Terry. It's got to be backed up with facts. Reality.
It's a human-to-human connection.
Yeah,
so hope
it is.
I believe that person's going to get me to a better place.
Now, I know a few leaders like that. I just wish I knew more. And I'm doing my best to help people to become those kind of leaders that don't just make empty promises, but actually deliver. Any other thoughts? The second article was about three things that I think and I encourage people to have a conversation about, and they are these three things. And I'll just minimize that one for now. A lot of leaders I meet don't have any integrity, and you can smell it the moment you meet them. And as soon as they open their mouth, they confirm it. Accountability is misunderstood, and authority is also being misunderstood. And so we have misrepresentation, we have misinformation, and just plain bullshit, instead of these three things. Any feelings or comments? Because I'm then going to move on to how this has evolved as a result of conversations I've been having with my clients, how this has evolved, including a recent evolution as recently as this morning. But before we do that, any comments on these three? I suggested to leaders in my Substack article, the last one, that, or the second last one, that people need a conversation about these three things and to come to a shared view about what they mean.
Ian, maybe if I can share with the group something that I heard last week, which I personally thought was hugely powerful. I had the privilege of listening to a gentleman called Nando Ferrado, who was the key survivor of the Andes plane crash in 1972. And that was a group of schoolboys, rugby playing schoolboys, who crashed in the Andes, and the movie Alive was made from. He was the guy who trekked over the mountains and got to the neighboring village 100 kilometers away and brought back rescue. But he made a point in his presentation to us, and it was a group of 40 people or so, that the greatest act of leadership he ever saw and has ever seen since happened there in the mountains. And it was the captain of the rugby team. And it was at the point of impact, and they realized the plane broke in two, and there was about 20 survivors. But it was minus 30 degrees, and the wind chill coming off the mountain was going to kill everyone within a number of hours. He jumped up, even though he was injured and so on, jumped up and actually started grabbing all the luggage to create a wall, a wind wall, for all the rest of the teammates. And what Nando was saying is he didn't know where that came from in terms of the desire to do this, the energy, but he said this was the greatest act of leadership ever that he's ever seen. And that guy ultimately died in an avalanche 10 days later. But for me, that resonated in that, you know, the old adage, leadership is about the goal, not about the role. And
Indeed.
if you had asked that 20 group of people, who's the leader, nobody would have been putting their hands up.
And these are only boys, right?
These are only boys, 19-year-old boys.
Yeah. It raises two things for me that I think are missing largely, but are essential in leadership, and they are selflessness and in service to others. And so the journey for me always begins with self-leadership. If you can't lead yourself, you haven't earned the right to lead others, in my view. And that's where my models and things have evolved in the conversation I'm having. Kirsty and Caroline have been in the room on a couple of occasions when we've looked at, in fact, Kirsty and I, as it turned out, we were the only ones in the room the other day where the model evolved to where it is, and I'll show you in a moment. But before we sort of do that, what are you hearing? What's coming up for you? It mightn't be the models that they're, as the great mathematician George Box said, all models are false, but some are useful. So it mightn't be the models, it might be something else that's going on, because we're really talking about real leadership. Well, what is it? What does it actually look like? I think we've forgotten. And how do we kindle it? How do we be it? The old ones pulled out often about being the change we want to see in the world, and it's attributed to Gandhi. As far as I know, it wasn't Gandhi, but it's been attributed to him. It's a good line regardless. Bit like the Napoleon one. I don't think it is Napoleon, Terry, but it's been attributed to him. I've seen a similar line going back, predating Napoleon, but it's still valuable because it helps us to check in with our own feelings and thoughts.
Yeah, I just looping back on that point again. I think too much of leadership today is privilege. It's position of privilege, it's top of the pyramid stuff. And not enough of it is actually, as you say, in service, in genuine respect for the group that you're leading. And it's as we said, it's a dynamic thing going back and forwards, and comes back to that point of the group have belief in that person to get them to a better place.
Yes, and as the old, I think it's a Chinese adage that says, if you see yourself as a leader and you turn around and no one's following, then you're just taking a walk. Caroline, Kirsty, what's coming up for you?
Well, yeah, I was just thinking that the same thing. For me, I love the Simon Sinek quote that leadership is the awesome responsibility to see those around us rise. And that ties in with this whole idea of selflessness, and that, yes, it's a responsibility.
So leadership is the
awesome responsibility to see those around us rise.
Great.
Simon Sinek. Yeah, so it's, for me, it ties back to your first model, Ian, which you talk about inspiring. To be a leader, you have to have that capacity to inspire others and to bring them along with you.
Yes.
Which is different from authority, but I was reading the articles that you shared, and I like what Richard Merrick says about authority, and that it's become the meaning of authority has become negative, or the connotation has become negative, when actually it's something positive.
Yes.
If you talk about somebody she's an authority on her subject, that's a positive use of the word authority that I like. Yes. Because that's somebody who inspires trust and belief in the fact that they can take you to a better place, as Terry was saying. Yes. So those are the thoughts that come up. For me, it's mainly about that capacity to inspire other people. I like the reference, the capacity to inspire. We all have the capacity, but we've sometimes got to dig deep to find that capacity. Yeah. Kirsty, Peter, what's running around in your hearts and minds that you can share with us?
I had views about inspiration and what a leader should and shouldn't be. But in the last week, I've really, I heard something over International Women's Day, which was, as you rise, you must lift everyone with you. And it really made me reflect to think that a real leader is someone who actually isn't ends in mind in their own rights, but it's someone who wants to uplift everyone with them.
Yes, yes, yes. There's another, it seems like an evening of quotes, but there's another one that says, you know, that a rising tide raises all ships. Peter, what's your inner wisdom telling you?
Not sure at the moment. I'm just sitting absorbing.
That's quite okay. We experienced some silence earlier, which I thought was wonderful, because silence is a part of conversation. And just sitting with things is another part of wise conversation. So we've experienced both those today. Let's take a look at where I'm at the moment. As I say, this was refreshed this morning and will be as a result of the earlier session, and again as a result of this evening's session. It will be refreshed again after we're done. But here's where I'm at currently in this quest to reimagine leadership. First of all, it is self-leadership, and we'll get to how I'm defining that at the moment. Then it's about clarity, then it's about decisions, then it's about strategy, and then it's about partnerships. And I'll link to this, for those that are watching, I'll link to this, but I'll also send it to you guys here on screen. And here are the current definitions. You might take a moment just to reflect on these. The red bits I added this morning after a conversation with a client, and then, as I say, as a result of this morning's group, which you'll see the recording, and you guys, there'll be some more changes, but here we are for the moment. Start over the left and look at my definition of leadership, which has changed. That first line hasn't changed in 30 years. The second line has changed at the top. So start there and then go over to the right and go around the circle. You'll see that my main premise is that leadership is about having wise conversations that build and sustain consensus. Which, if you look at the various meanings of consensus, it means consent, which I think is a very important word that needs to be in our conversations. But I'll leave you just to reflect for a few moments. Just raise your hand if you need more time. Okay, a few more moments. All right, well, we'll leave it there for the moment. As I say, I will send this to you, and I'll put a link to it in the underneath the video on YouTube. What do you hear yourself say to yourself based on this model?
How's the sound, Ian, if I talk?
Yes, we can hear you, David. Thank you.
I've been going to chime in a few times, but I'm mindful of the fact that I'm not in a brilliant area. I'm nearly home. Had a great opportunity, obviously, to talk to you the other day with Paul as well in relation to that, what we call it, diagram chart.
Yep.
Just reflecting on it, I think that there's so much power in that self-leadership, and I think it goes towards much of what I've loved about your concepts and ideas and teaching, I suppose, around starting with yourself first. I think it's massive power to it. Equally, there's significant power, I think, in how you carry yourself and knowing what your impact is, because it obviously clearly flows to all of those other aspects that come with it, with the decision-making strategy and partnerships that you then create. So in terms of my thinking is going towards leading yourself, essentially, to make sure you're in the best, most capable position you can be. Alan Parker talks a lot about MEP, getting your mind, emotional and physical state right. So getting that real control of yourself and being in the best possible position to, you know, be well placed to make really good decisions that then flow beyond that to the strategy and the connections, the partnerships that you create will clearly make you a better leader, or it should enable you the opportunity to be a better leader.
Yes.
Based on those aspects.
In this morning's session, Simon asked a wonderful question, and it was it was a conversation he had with one of his employees yesterday, and the question was, when are you at your best? Which comes back to this, you know, self-leadership. As I say, all change is personal first. Relationship change is second, and organizational change is a very distant third. And most organizations try and start with the organization, they ignore the relationships and they ignore the people, and then therefore change never works. So that follows the same principle. We've got to look in the mirror, understand when we're at our best, and then facilitate making sure that we're in environments where whatever brings us the best out of us is possible. And of course, leadership is, I think, co-creating such a space, you know, where people can be the best version of themselves. Because I tell you what, folks, we're all good enough. The best of us is good enough. Here we are, over 7 billion unique, one-of-a-kind human beings, no duplicates. And if everyone's at their best, although, as Margaret Mead suggested many years ago, it only takes a few. And if a few are influencing, and, you know, here we are, we've got 7 of us here, we're influencing those in our world. And those influences in our world, whether it's our neighborhood or our clients or our customers or our brothers and sisters, it doesn't matter. It's all part of our world. When we're influencing and inspiring and impacting those people in a positive and productive way, it has ripples to the rest of the world. And we often never know when it happens. Many years ago, I was approached in the street in Melbourne by a person who to me was a stranger, and he gave me a bear hug right in the middle of the street, which frightened the hell out of me at that moment. He didn't say a word, he just gave me a hug. And it turned out that 10 years before that, I gave a talk at the Dallas Brooks Hall in Melbourne. It was one of my biggest audiences. There were over 4,000 people in the room that day. And I talked about being a hero in your own home first, which is one of the stories I've shared here in this space, and I'll put a link to it. But he went home that night. His marriage was struggling, and he thought it was going to end. And he went home that night, and he promised his wife that he would change himself, that he would become the man that he believed that not only he could be, but she wanted him to be. And he told me in the street that day that 10 years on, everything was going great guns. And that they built the kind of relationship that they both wanted. So we never know when our inspiration or our influence touches somebody. And if we're authentic, it doesn't. We don't need to know. You know, I don't step out of my house or step on screen with a deliberate desire to change somebody or whatever. I just be myself. And the ripples, as I say, the ripples matter. It builds a song in my heart, which is why I'm a bit emotional. It makes my heart sing, this kind of thing. But we don't go out there looking for that. It just happens anyway. You know, I had a note just the other day from a guy that, or a lady actually, who was in an audience 5 or 6 years ago, who sent me a note, a handwritten note, to say that she'd been in an audience and she took an idea from what I had to say and she implemented it, and it made so much difference in her life, you know, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's priceless when we get such feedback. But if we're being authentic, as I say, we're all good enough. We're all capable of inspiring other people to be the best version of themselves. And
yeah,
yep, go ahead, Terry.
I think at times we're trapped by linguistics.
Trapped by linguistics?
Yeah, because the term leadership is so broad and so all-encompassing. You know, when you think of this story, whether it's true or not, that Eskimos have 40 different words for snow. You know, it's so broad. Lots of things can fit in there, and some are even contradictory to each other, which then leaves people puzzled. Strategy is another one. It's such a broad term, and some of the things are contradictory. People get confused and then start to give up on it. Yeah.
Well, we're blessed, Terry, that Caroline is a linguist. So maybe she can help us. As we had Alan in the room this morning, also a linguist. So we're blessed that we've got some people in the conversation. What does it suggest, Caroline, from a linguistic point of view?
What does what suggest?
The idea that leadership, like strategy and so many other things, performance, you know, goal setting, you can go on and on. The definitions are so broad that we actually lose the emphasis or impact.
I'm sorry, there's a terrible, can you hear a terrible background noise?
We can't hear at this end, so you are just...
Okay. Well, you tell me linguist, yes, if you ask me how to say these words in another language, I could help you. But I understand what you mean, and that I think the definitions, because we've just been saying that it's, you know, we've been coming up with the quotes that are meaningful to us, and I think that it's finding what's meaningful, what speaks to us. It's like you're saying, Ian, that when you see when you see words that have come from somebody else, but that light something up in us, like, I mean, you shared when you said that in 1990 you came up with a definition for leadership. It's the art of inspiring people to bring everything they are to everything they do.
Yes,
and
which I haven't changed. Exactly,
because it works, and I read that, I thought, wow. And so it's the language is what speaks to us, I think. You know, and Terry's saying that this, you know, what does strategy actually mean, or what the meaning of authority has become, you know, twisted over the years, but it's what we see in it, and then how we act on that, I think is the most important thing. So it's the language that speaks to us, and then that defines our particular way forward.
Yes. One of the questions that I often ask in groups when I'm working with, you know, private groups is, what does being a leader mean to you? And that often leads to 10 different views, as you would say, Terry, but there's usually common ground. And I like it, Caroline, what's meaningful to an individual is the key. The most recent time I asked the question was last week, and the answer that got the applause in the room was, "I'd just be myself."
But Ian, the point the reason I raise it is, we have all sat in different leadership courses or speeches or all these sort of things. And on reflection, I think there's an unintended trap laid by the speakers, and it's totally unintended, because they seek to define it, define something in a narrow sense, which basically means other interpretations of it are wrong. And I know they don't mean to do that. They don't set out to do that, because they're setting out to create clarity, but immediately it creates exclusion. And what Caroline said, sorry.
I was just going to say, there's some ancient wisdom, goes back about 7,000 years, and it basically says that as soon as we define something, we negate it.
And this is what, you know, interested to hear what Caroline what Caroline said there, in that it's more about an energy, in terms of, does the person energize either thoughts or actions in you?
Yes. Yep.
Because not all leadership is action oriented. Sometimes it's thought oriented. If you take the likes of Martin Luther King, "I have a dream," that was a paradigm shift. It wasn't any action, but it changed the narrative. So, and that energized people. So, you know, there's an essence of energy, and does the person give energy to other people? For me, seems to be a common thread. But again, I'm very cautious of calling it a definition, because I don't want to fall into that same trap of excluding other, you know, emotions and feelings of what it is.
But I think the simplicity around that, you mentioned energy. I think, you know, leadership simply regaining or sustaining energy.
No, and it'd be really interesting in Peter's take, because I always find Peter extremely thoughtful and insightful.
Well, as well as a linguist, we have a psychologist in Peter, a long-standing one. So Peter, over to you.
But it's really scaring me that he's staying so quiet. That's really, really unnerving me.
It scares me too.
Nothing worse than a quiet psychologist.
It's not like me at all, but I'm just in a very reflective state at the moment. So yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not sure I've got anything to contribute at the moment.
That's good.
That's quite okay. Maybe you've got something later on that you can put below the video or something. This morning, one of the most interesting things coming from the other linguist in Alan Parker, I'm just going to find the exact line. Just regain my notes from this morning. We're looking for a bit of a summary towards the end, which we'll do ourselves in a moment. But Alan said, citizenship equals shared authority, which equals consensus. So leadership is citizenship equals shared authority equals consensus. I think it's pretty good. And it'll be in my evolving notes.
But just a challenge to that, Ian, is citizenship is not always consensus. It's sometimes acceptance of democracy majority.
I think that's still okay if the caveat for me would be if the people have been engaged. The trouble with democracy right now is that in most cases, the politicians are not representing the people. They're representing their own interests or the interests of the corporations who tell them what to do, because they're their major donors.
Yeah.
But at the moment, in my opinion, the world's run by oligarchs, most of whom run corporations, who tell the politicians what to do based on the money they gave them. And the end result is we don't get represented. So there's been a surge in citizens' councils. Probably one of the most famous, Terry, happened there in Ireland, where the people took on the Catholic Church and won over abortion. It didn't come from the politicians initially, it came from a citizens' council. The politicians then endorsed the citizens' council. It was put to the people and the people won.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of evidence of this around. One of the things that I will include in the book I'm writing about the art of wise conversations, it's somewhat controversial, but in its original form, socialism is a great idea. We've just never tried it.
Yeah.
You know, we poo-hooed it because we think it's communism, but socialism is not communism. And in its original purest format, I think socialism is a great idea, a better idea than democracy. And I can see conversations heading in that direction. As I say, it's a tad controversial. It shouldn't be, because it's common sense, in my opinion.
What do you mean it's better than democracy? In that democracy, the concept is supposed to be the voice of the people being heard. So
But it's not.
No, I know the reality exactly as you described it. You know, it's a sham. It's a pretend. You know, we pretend to have a say, but we don't really, because we're part of a system that's run by powerful vested interests.
Pure socialism would not only give us a say, but it would give us ownership.
Yeah.
In the structures that currently profit from us.
Yeah, so we're moving towards a technocratic sort of world that it's, you know, very top down. So
yes, I don't think we're moving. I think we've arrived.
Yeah, well, that's right, and so now there's this groundswell of people pushing back and saying we don't consent to this. This isn't what, you know, we weren't involved in this. This is not what we would choose. And the whole notion of decentralization of power is actually what we need, not centralization, but it's dressed up as, you know, sort of one world government, which will make all the decisions for all of us because there's a handful of powerful technocrats who think they know better than everyone else, when in fact local people know what's best for them and would rather run their own communities.
Yes.
Although people tend to, you know, coming back to this, you know, people look for leadership somewhere because they don't want to take responsibility for themselves. They want somebody to do it for them. They want to fix everything. And I think we've been so, you know, brainwashed over centuries that that's how it works, probably going back to the whole, you know, religious notion of what God is. And, you know, God is the central authority who tells everyone what to do and we have to obey.
And if you disagree with that, you're a heretic, and we used to burn you at the stake once upon a time.
Yeah. Although ironically, going back to your concept of principles, you know, that it's those principles that we have to obey. So in fact, that's what God really is. It's universal principles. But of course, religion sort of took over the concept of what God is and, you know, was used by human ego to have power over other people. Which,
yes. I mean, the very idea of an external God is a dumb idea from a principles perspective.
Yeah.
But man changed it and made this external power, which is why most people bow down to external powers rather than being the power themselves. I was having a conversation a few weeks ago with a guy who is really the default leader within the team that he's working with. The guy who's the named leader is abdicated, and the real leader has stepped up. And he said to me, "I don't want to be a leader, mate." And it was in very strong language. And I said to him, "From what I can observe, you're an absolutely brilliant consensus builder. And therefore, in my view, you're a great leader. Because what I'm witnessing is a team full of people, apart from the leader who's abdicated. What I'm seeing is a team full of people that have got shared expectations and a shared view about how to go about achieving them. And you facilitated all of that." And he was like a bit taken aback. And the end result was, I made some representations to other people with the consensus actually of the person who'd abdicated, and he's now been moved on to another company. Hopefully, it's not what the Catholic Church did and moved the priest to another parish. But they actually facilitated him leaving the current organisation and getting a role with another organisation. I was a part of the process, and it might work. He actually put his hand up and said, "Yes, I have abdicated." I can't really say anymore because we're recording this. Other feelings, thoughts, we're sort of coming in for a bit of a landing shortly. So are there other feelings and thoughts that you feel? I mean, if what you're saying, Peter, was called democracy, I'm okay with the label, because that's what democracy actually is when you read the definitions. But even the Greeks who invented it didn't really live it. We were talking earlier today, it's actually the, what's the official name, Terry? Today is the
Ides of March.
The Ides of March. It was the day Caesar was stabbed.
So avoid anybody with a dagger or anybody called Brutus.
Indeed. Other feelings, thoughts?
I'd like to share something, because I remember in the past Ian saying that I'm not really a models person. I don't, I know that a lot of your work is based on the models that you come up with, and I've never really worked like that. But as I've been listening and absorbing, I have come up with a little model.
There you go.
For my own work, because for everything that we've said, and what Terry was just saying about energy, that for me is key as well. Energy and passion, is a fundamental parts of leadership, and obviously a belief in what we're doing and where we're going. And as a result of that energy and passion, that's how we can inspire people and bring them with us to a better place. But key to that is communication. And that's why I was thinking that my work, it's the well-crafted message, it's the well-told story, in order to be able to bring those people with you.
Beautiful.
And as a result, collectively, we have that positive impact that we're seeking to make.
Can you put that into a diagram and send it to me, Caroline, so I can include it in the notes? I mean, for me, and probably you, models, I only use models for one reason, and that is to get the conversation going, or to enhance the conversation, or to add value to the conversation. They're really conversation helpers. That's my purpose for creating models. Peter's got a lot of wonderful models as well, and I think Peter would probably agree that they're just there to help people get started, get going, pick up on something, reflect, whatever it might be.
And Caroline, can I just pick up on that, what you said, because I think that this is a compliment to our host Ian himself, in that he's always been an advocate, for as long as I remember him, of the importance of storytelling. Now, the first time I ever heard that, I thought, what is this? This is nonsense. Storytelling? We're in a business. And I've grown over the years to actually go full 180 degrees the other side. Because if you come back to what we said at the start of a leader is a dealer in hope, you don't give hope, you don't create emotional connection hope by always having a logical plan. You create the emotional connection of hope by actually having a vision that you communicate in a simple way that energizes people. And as you said, that's the storytelling, that's the art of communication.
Yes.
And I think, you know, that's a compliment back to Ian.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. But it's also inherent in our nature. We are hardwired to hear stories, and we don't need to say, like, I would never say I'm about to tell you a story that will give you hope. You know, I just tell the story. The story will do its own work. And that's the power, of course, of the story, is that people don't need to have it explained. They will work it out themselves because we're hardwired to do that. And there's overwhelming evidence that supports that in both neuroscience, but also, you know, positive psychology and other streams of thought. Alan raised the concept of biogenesis this morning, which is just another way that this occurs. You know, life itself is biogenesis. You know, Caroline, you're a mum, and you therefore participated in biogenesis, as is those of us who are dads. That's what we did too. And there's all sorts of ways that this happens. And I think leaders, as storytellers, we create an environment where biogenesis is possible. All right. It's been wonderful to have you in the room. Is there any thoughts, feelings before we go, David? Yes?
Yeah, I was going to add to what I was saying earlier in relation to that self-leadership. I feel like there's a need for a willingness within yourself to notice where you have shortcomings or where you need to, you know, build on that capacity to have self-leadership within yourself, which then flows towards the willingness to want to hear a leader. The comment earlier around communication is vitally important, provided there's a willingness to want to have that communication in the first place, because without that willingness to want to have the communication is almost pointless, which I think is where the problem lies with things like socialism and democracy. Like, if there's a feeling of apathy or there's a feeling of disconnect with whichever model it is, the leadership is almost lost in itself, because there's that whole concept of the people within a thing, they're just going along with it because they need to. So I think willingness is really important. And the only thing I was going to add to that was, in terms of flow, Alan, and you would have seen this before as well, Ian, and it's not a unique thing to Alan Parker necessarily, but the bell curve of getting that mix right in terms of enough pressure on yourself and not too much pressure, so that you can be in that state of flow yourself.
Yes.
But your own version of self-leadership enables you to be the best version of yourself, which hopefully, if you're a leader, you're going to create an environment to enable others to be in their best state for an opportunity to have a flow.
Yeah, indeed.
And David, can I just jump in there in terms of, I think what you're saying is super in being tuned in to self-awareness and improvement. And a little thing that I was taught, and I remind myself regular on, is ask yourself regularly, do you bring energy into a room? Do you suck energy out of a room? Or are you passive and you're not conducting any energy? And be self-aware on that every time you're engaging with people. And it's amazing the amount of times at the end of the day you go, actually, I can do better.
What was the third one, Terry? I got, do you bring energy into a room? Do you suck energy out of a room? There was a third one.
Or are you passive? Are you passive? You're not doing anything. You're not conducting any energy. You're not moving it around.
Yeah.
And it might be an opportunity for you to notice that this might not be a room I need to be in often.
Yeah, great questions to ask. Anything else? It seems appropriate today for me to leave you with a quote. And so I could be egotistical and quote myself, but I won't be. I'll instead use the wonderful line from Geeta Balin. She was a poet, and she said, "Success depends on where intention is." We'll leave you with that. I'll send you links in a day or so. Caroline, look forward to getting your model so I can include that in the links.
Okay.
Great
All the
chat.
best.
Thank
And,
you.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
Have a
everybody.
super day.
all the best.
Bye.
Bye.